Hello there, sword friends. Today I'm going to tell you about this sword right here. It is a Miaodao, and before I get into the review, a couple quick notes and disclaimers. One, this is courtesy of Sword Friend Matt. So Sword Friend Matt is a private sword citizen and a donor of a number of swords that have met their end on the channel. He has given a lot to posterity, as well as the Croquet Stake of Doom, which is the end for many swords. Anyway, Sword Friend Matt sent me this Miaodao. He got it from a company called Ladies and Gentlemen, and it was about $450. And this one, Sword Friend Matt actually wants back, so I'm not going to bring it to failure, but he did give me license to use it aggressively, and so I have done that, and I can talk about the experience of using it. And a spoiler, it's a really fun sword. I really have had a lot of fun. Miaodaos are cool, and if you are interested in getting one, I'm not sure if you can get this one. If I can find a link to it, I'll provide it in the description down below. But if not, then Miaodaos themselves are kind of neat. I haven't played with a sword like this before. It was my first Miaodao to experience, and it was a lot of fun to move around. It was a lot of fun. It was familiar and different, but I suppose I'll talk about that. Anyway, bit bob, fit features, and all of that kind of stuff. So down at the end here, we have a ring pommel, which is affixed with a nut that appears to be stuck through an end cap or something like that with some dragon designs, and this kind of dragon design is going to flow throughout the sword. Now, the fittings themselves are not so bad. They look a little different. I do make out some tool marks. It looks like they're cast or pressed and then welded together, and some of the detailing has been lost in the areas where they're welded or fixed together. The nut at the bottom as well is a little cheap looking, and this does have a little bit of wiggle to it, but I haven't bopped anything with it and it hasn't come loose. What I do like though is that the transition on the handle doesn't have a ledge here, so they've finished the wood in such a way where it lines up pretty even with the metal fitting, and I like that extra bit of detail. That was also done on this collar up here, where the wood isn't left over. And a lot of times what I've seen on a number of companies is that one or the other fitting will just overlap or be covering the wood rather than having these smooth transitions between them. So I like the addition or the transition between these two things. There appear to be two bamboo pegs and a type of wood that I see used on a lot of Chinese style swords for the handle, and it's a little bit ovoid, but you don't have a problem grabbing it or indexing it. It feels like it fits in your hand, and you can kind of get some idea of where the edge is, though not as surgical, I guess, as I would like. It'd be nice if it was a little bit more swept in so that I could index it a little bit better, but with a lot of leverage, that round edge probably is going to help you not feel a lot of shock in your hands, which I will say I didn't feel. I whacked the ground, I whacked frozen blocks, I whacked branches with this thing, and at no point did it provide me with a significant amount of shock in my hands. The blade has a lot of flex to it, so I think the blade is, I don't know, dissolving or absorbing that shock, and it's either way, it's not ending in my hand. And a lot of times a sword this big, if I hit something and I don't make it through, I get the feeling that I get an uncomfortable feeling of shock in my hands, and I didn't feel that at all here. So, however the handle is made, it seems to hold that well. And I'm guessing that the tang probably goes down to about yay, not all the way down to the end. I'm guessing, but I haven't broken it apart, so I don't know exactly how much metal is in it. The crossguard here has an S curve to it, and the little bulbs on the end are swollen in such a way that it provides a little bit of dimension, but not much. The dragon theme and the kind of little stippling and stuff is consistent on this crossguard area, much like it is on the rest of the fittings. There's no blade collar, habaki, or any other thing. The blade just comes out of the crossguard area here, and I would say that it is finished in such a way where there's very little gap where the blade meets the crossguard. There is some, but overall it's pretty minor for a sword at $450. A lot of times the gaps are bigger in this price point. Before I move on to the blade, I'll talk a little bit about the fittings on the scabbard. Now, unfortunately, these are not recessed in the scabbard. It would have been a nice thing if they were, but they are not. They do have the same kind of texture and dimension as the rest of them. Stippling, dragon, and clouds kind of theme. The fittings on the scabbard as well will move. I can kind of get them to come apart. At the moment, they seem rather stuck on there, but for a time they were moving around. And then there's a large metal end cap here that has the same kind of dragon theme. Now this I happen to like. If you're actually wearing this in the belt, it's very easy to whack the ground with a sword this big. So having this metal cap on here and having it kind of not finished a little bit here is kind of nice. There's not much to damage in the spots that you're actually going to grind it on the ground. And I overall like the little bits of finish. They seem to have not finished the edge. That's likely where everything was welded together, but because it's consistent, it actually kind of blends in reasonably well. All right, now I'm going to talk about the blade, the pointy stabby part, and this has a lot of stuff going on, so I'm going to attempt to cover it here. One, the blade is made of a folded steel. You can kind of see some of those details in the etch that they have, but honestly, a lot of that detail is kind of obscured. It also looks like there may have been some differential heat treatment here, because there are little spots that look like it has a hamon or a harder edge than a spine, or than the spine. The spine is also a pipe back, and it starts extremely thick at the base and really thins out. There's a good amount of distal taper here, and a lot of that I think is in the pipe back. But it's just neat to see, as I understand, a pipe back or this really thick bulbous spine is common on Miaodao. It's not something that I've experienced on a lot of swords. Makes it a little weird to cut with, but it's a neat feature in terms of rigidity on the sword, and I appreciate the skill it takes to make. Anyway, there's a pipe back feature here. That's on the sword. It has a good amount of distal taper, which I wasn't expecting. Well, I was kind of hoping for, but I guess I wasn't expecting it as much, or to be as elegantly integrated into the pipe back as it is. There's a large secondary bevel on here. I'm not sure if Swordfriend Matt did that or not. He tends to sharpen his swords, so it's possible this is courtesy of Swordfriend Matt, or it may have come to from the factory this way. But either way, there's a good secondary bevel on here. And yeah, those are most of the features. There's just little elements that look like it might be differentially heat treated in some spaces. I'm not exactly sure about that, but when I went to go move it around and cut with it, I would say the results that I have are indicative perhaps of a differential heat treatment, or at least not a particularly springy heat treatment, because it did take a set and bend somewhat easily, which is a little bit more common with a differentially hardened blade. Anyway, the blade itself just has a lot going on. It's really cool to look at, and it also feels pretty nice in the hand. I can hold this comfortably one-handed without getting fatigued, but it also is obviously very long, and so you expect it to be a little bit more robust and uncomfortable, but it really balances out quite well. Now, in terms of moving it around, I have no idea how to move a Miaodao, but I do study a little bit about how to move a naginata, and so this is, on one hand, similar to a sword and doesn't feel at least uncomfortable to move like a sword and do some of the basic kata that I understand with a katana. It's not completely out of the wheelhouse of using, just quite a bit longer, but it certainly feels a little bit more comfortable to use as a naginata, which obviously it's not, but if I hold it in about the same place that I would hold a naginata and move it around, then it kind of feels like a naginata. So it's familiar but different to me. Anyway, I had a lot of fun moving it around. It's really an entertaining piece to move around. I don't necessarily study anything about how to use it, but it kind of feels familiar, which is, I think, what makes this one just bring a smile to my face. I held it, and even though I don't know how to use it, it feels lively enough in my hand and just somewhat intuitive to use, which is always fun when you find a sword like that. Now, in terms of cutting, I would say it cut reasonably well. It's reasonably sharp, which again may be from Swordfriend Matt, but it does have a secondary bevel and a pipe back, so it's not exactly graceful in the cut. You have to find your distance, which is a little different for me. You get a little bit more of it than I'm used to, and when I cut things, it does cut them, but it also kind of smacks them around, because if you're not great on your edge angle, or even if you are, it just tends to take your target with you a little bit. And also the blade has a lot of flex, and you really feel that in the cuts or the attempts at them. So I cut some water bottles and things like that. Overall, the lighter targets didn't really have a problem. I wasn't great at pool noodles, but it was okay if I got. It's easy to generate tip speed with something this big, and it did have a reasonably keen edge, but it wasn't great, I guess. The water bottles and stuff, it didn't roll the edge. It wasn't until I brought it out to some other aggressive types of targets, branches and stuff like that, where I started experiencing problems with the edge and with it flexing a lot and with it taking some bends and stuff like that. So I cut branches and the like, and that's kind of more or less where it was starting to bend and flex and have some problems, and more or less where I called the testing. But it cut into them, and so what it made me think is, if you're trying to defend against spears or something like that, well, the blade's going to bend, but it more or less stayed straight. It kept itself as a weapon, and you could certainly bat those things away, but you have a sharp, pointy stick to stab back into with. At no point did it deform in such a way that it was no longer at least useful as a weapon or couldn't be repaired. And there are a few parts where I whacked it into the ground, because because I'm not used to cutting with something this long, and it did scrape the ground, but nothing chipped off, and the edge damage that I have on here from any of the harder targets or the other aggressive stuff that you might say I cut is all really superficial edge damage that can be sharpened out even by a novice like me. So nothing that can't be straightened out. It's going to take me a little bit of time to straighten the blade, but I'm pretty confident I'll even be able to do that. It doesn't bend super easy, but it does bend easy enough where I'm confident that I could get it mostly back to straight. Anyway, it held up well, and it was really fun to use. I don't know if my infatuation with this sword is because this one is particularly special, or if I just haven't played with enough Miaodao, but this was definitely a fun sword to move. I had a lot of fun doing it. Miaodaos are cool, and if you have a chance to get one of these, well, it put a smile on my face, so I'd encourage you to as well. And $450 doesn't seem crazy for what you're getting here. There's folded steel, there's an interesting and unique blade geometry, there's good dynamics and handling, and while the fittings are, the characteristics are not necessarily all that fantastic, there still is a lot of other fun to be had here, a lot of other special stuff, and the blade and the feeling of it are something that kind of by default make me say, yes, this is a pretty fun sword. Anyway, that's all I've got for this video. Hopefully you found it interesting. Thanks again to Swordfriend Matt for letting me borrow this for an extended period of time. It was a lot of fun to move. That's all I've got. Cheers, and thanks for watching.